The only thing really resembling a government was the church. The Catholic Church provided one of the few unifying elements in Europe after the fall of Rome. During medieval times, the Church developed a strict hierarchy which still exists today. The levels of this hierarchy include the Pope, at the very top. He was the leader of the Catholic Church, and he was the director of church policy. Cardinals are under the Pope. Cardinals are appointed by the Pope. They both advise the Pope and select his successor when he dies. Archbishops are under cardinals. They supervise a large region or major city. Under the archbishop are bishops. Bishops are the priests in charge of a particular region or church government post. Under the bishop are the bottom of the hierarchy, the priests. Priests are a minister who performs most day to day church activities, usually associated with a specific church or a church organization. As the Catholic Church grew in popularity, popes worked to increase the church's power as a political entity. As kingdoms came and went in the early Middle Ages, many popes asserted that their authority was equal to or greater than the various political leaders of Europe. The popes more powerful than the king. In 1075, the investiture controversy erupted when Pope Gregory VII insisted that the church, not kings, should control the appointment of archbishops, bishops, and other clergy. I'll repeat. The investiture controversy was when the church thought that they should control church appointments, not kings. Henry IV of Germany disagreed. He was the king of Germany. He wants to choose the church officials. After the two men exchanged bitter letters, the Pope and Henry, the Pope excommunicated Henry. The Pope also threatened to excommunicate any German clergy who did not obey him. Since much of Henry's army came from lands administered by the church, he was vulnerable to attack from powerful nobles. Henry went to Italy to seek papal forgiveness. At the same time, the Pope started a journey to Germany to install a new king. They met at a castle in Canossa, Italy, where Henry stood in the snow for 3 days before Gregory forgave him. Though this episode resulted in a dramatic collapse of royal power, the Pope was unable to control other European monarchs in the same manner. The rivalry between church and state continued for centuries. However, there was no question that Europe was united under the Christian faith. Throughout this era, the Catholic Church dramatically expanded its property holdings and became the largest single landowner in all of Europe, in the process making it extremely wealthy. Many popes hoped to use the growing power and wealth of the Church to unify Europe into a large Christian state. A Christian movement called Monasticism, which had begun in the 3rd century, became more popular in the 5th century. Concern about the growing worldliness of the church led to the criticism by those who felt that a meditative life organized under a strict regulation of silence, obedience, physical labor, and religious practice was closer to the true meaning of Christianity. Throughout Europe, religious men and women established secluded enclaves called monasteries that were dedicated to these ideals. Men in these communities were called monks, while women were known as nuns. They lived simple lives, often in basic communal dwellings. Most prevalent model of the time was Benedictine monasticism, modeled after the life of Saint Benedict of Nursia, who lived from 480 to 543. Benedictine monasticism involved taking three vows: one of chastity, one of poverty, and one of obedience. Most monks lived highly structured lives and engaged in activities such as producing copies of classical works, which they did by writing out the complete work by hand. Um, Monks also read a lot, they studied, they did manual labor, especially farming, which would often serve as the monastery's main source of economic support. So they were self sufficient. Monasticism was not the only new movement in the church. Other new religious orders, such as the Franciscans and Dominicans, dedicated themselves to working in the community rather than retiring from it. Founded in the early 13th century, the Franciscans and Dominicans were both mendicant orders. Members took vows of poverty and depended on charity to support them, so that they could devote all their time to preaching and aiding the poor and downtrodden. The orders were also a response to the growing number of heretics who had become disillusioned with the church and were interested in ideas contrary to Christian doctrine. They hoped that providing examples of religious men and women leading godly lives in service to the community would draw people back to the church. Many continued deviant. Many continued to deviate from church doctrine. So in 1233, the church established a special court called the Inquisition in order to combat heresy. Dominicans, who were usually highly educated and skilled in debate, were often chosen to direct the operation of the Inquisition. They're basically lawyers. Accused heretics were brought before the Inquisition, and if they admitted error, they would be released after a penance or punishment was administered. If they were slow or uncooperative, they would be tortured. A convicted heretic was burned at the stake. As new kingdoms and church grew during the early Middle Ages, so did the need for education and capable administrators. Before the 1100s, education had taken place within monasteries or in large urban cathedrals run by bishops. In addition, Muslim schools in cities such as Cordoba and Baghdad had preserved and promoted the study of writings from ancient Greece and Rome. As knowledge from these schools made its way to the rest of Europe, it stimulated a renewed interest in classical writings, such as the works of Aristotle, the study of law, philosophy, and medicine. Groups of students and teachers in Europe would gather to study in groups, each known as a guild or a universitas in Latin. These evolved into universities. The first European university developed in Salerno and Bologna in Italy. Others were established in Paris, in France, and in Oxford, that's in England. Also Cambridge, in England. Some of these schools are still here today. That's the end of today's lecture.